My name is Amanda, and I am 27 years old. The night everything fell apart started with pain so sharp it stole my breath. Pain that folded me in half on my kitchen floor while my twins cried in their cribs, confused and scared. I remember gripping the counter, calling my parents with shaking hands, thinking this was the moment family was meant for. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, doctors were already talking fast, using words like emergency surgery. Now, as they wheeled me down the hallway under blinding lights, my mind wasn't on myself. It was on my babies. I called my parents again from the hospital bed, my voice weak but hopeful, explaining that I needed them to watch the twins just for a few hours. What came back wasn't concern or urgency. It was annoyance. My mother sighed. My father barely spoke. And then the words landed like a slap. They refused to care for my twins while I was in emergency surgery, saying that I was a nuisance and a burden because they already had tickets to see Taylor Swift with my sister. I remember staring at the wall, the room suddenly silent except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I asked them if they were serious, if they understood I was being taken into surgery. My mother snapped that I was always dramatic, that I should have planned better, and that this concert meant a lot to my sister. In that moment, fear turned into disbelief, and disbelief hardened into something colder. Nurses were adjusting for lines while I sat there realizing my children meant less to my parents than a night of music. I begged once, just once more, swallowing my pride and my tears. But my father said I was being selfish and hung up. I felt humiliated, abandoned, and terrified all at the same time. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely unlock my phone. But I forced myself to think clearly. I couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. With my parents choosing a concert over my children, I had no choice. From that hospital bed, knowing I might be put under anesthesia at any second, I searched for emergency childcare and called a nanny I barely knew, explaining everything in a broken voice. When she said she could come immediately, relief hit me so hard I started crying without making a sound. I sent her my address, instructions for the twins, everything, hoping she would arrive before I was taken away. As doctors came back to prep me for surgery, another reality settled in. My parents weren't just refusing help. They were showing me exactly where I stood in their lives, lying there exposed under thin hospital sheets. I replayed every time I had supported them financially, every holiday I had organized, every excuse I had made for their coldness. And suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't a one-time failure. This was who they were. When the nurse told me it was time, I nodded, gripping my phone one last time until I received confirmation that the nanny had arrived and my twins were safe. Only then did I allow myself to let go. As they rolled me toward the operating room, tears slid into my hair. Not just from fear of surgery, but from the realization that the people who should have protected me had labeled me a burden at the worst moment of my life. I went under anesthesia carrying that pain with me, unaware that this betrayal was only the beginning of a chain of events that would expose my family in ways they never expected. And that 2 weeks later, a single knock would change everything. When I woke up from surgery, the first thing I did was reach for my stomach, then for my phone. My body felt heavy, like it didn't fully belong to me yet, and my throat burned from the breathing tube. A nurse noticed my panic and gently told me the surgery was successful. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was fear for my twins. My hands were still shaking as I unlocked my phone and saw messages from the nanny confirming she had stayed with them through the night, fed them, bathed them, and put them to sleep safely. I closed my eyes and exhaled for the first time since the ambulance ride. They were okay. That was all that mattered. But the relief didn't erase what had happened. As the hours passed and the pain medication wore on and off, my mind replayed my parents' words again and again. Nuisance, burden. Each time it hurt just as much as the first. I lay there alone, no parents by my side. No family checking in, just nurses coming and going with polite smiles. My sister didn't call either. Later that day, I checked social media and saw photos already posted. My parents and sister smiling, dressed up, counting down to the concert. My chest tightened as I realized they hadn't even waited to see if I survived. That image burned itself into my memory. Lying in that hospital bed, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never beg them again. By the second day, the doctors talked about recovery time, about rest, about support at home. I nodded, knowing I had none of that from the people who were supposed to care. I arranged everything myself. Extra hours for the nanny, grocery deliveries, follow-up appointments while my body was still weak and sore. Each decision I made alone felt like another thread snapping between me and my parents. When my mother finally called, it wasn't to ask how I was. It was to complain. She said I had embarrassed them by making a big deal out of nothing, that family drama should stay private, and that I owed them an apology for overreacting. I listened in silence, my hand clenched around the phone. And when she finished, I told her calmly that I was done being dismissed, done being used, done being treated like I didn't matter. I told her I had arranged my life without them and that I would no longer be sending money or covering their expenses. She laughed at first like I was joking. Then her voice changed, sharp and angry, accusing me of being ungrateful. I ended the call without another word. That night, staring at the dark hospital ceiling, I cried harder than I had since becoming a mother. Not because I missed them, but because I finally accepted the truth. The family I kept trying to save didn't exist. When I was discharged, I went home to my twins, holding them close, breathing in their familiar scent, promising them they would never be made to feel unwanted. Days turned into a week, and then 2. I focused on healing, on routines, on building a quiet life without the constant anxiety of pleasing my parents. Then, exactly 2 weeks after my surgery, on a quiet afternoon, when the house was finally calm, I heard a knock at the door. Not a text, not a call, a knock. Firm, unexpected, and heavy with meaning. My heart skipped as I stood up, unaware that behind that door stood the moment my parents would finally face the consequences of their choices. I froze when I heard the knock, my heart instantly racing, as if my body recognized trouble before my mind did. The twins were napping, the house unusually quiet, and for a split second, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But the knock came again, louder this time, impatient. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. It was my parents. Standing between them was my grandfather, my dad's father, his posture straight, his face stern in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. Confusion mixed with dread as I opened the door. Before I could say a word, my mother started talking, her voice sharp and rehearsed, accusing me of being dramatic, of punishing them by cutting off financial support, of making the family look bad. She demanded we talk like adults. I didn't respond. I was still trying to understand why my grandfather was there. He stepped forward then, gently moving past my mother, his eyes locking onto mine. "Amanda," he said quietly, and just hearing my name spoken with respect almost broke me. He asked if he could come in. I nodded and stepped aside. The living room felt smaller with all of them inside, tension thick enough to choke on. My parents continued complaining, talking over each other, insisting they had done nothing wrong, that emergencies happen, but life doesn't stop. My grandfather listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he raised his hand, and the room went still. He turned to my parents and asked one simple question. "Is it true you refused to watch her twins while she was in emergency surgery?" My mother tried to laugh it off, saying it wasn't that serious, that Amanda was exaggerating. That's when my grandfather's voice changed. Calm, controlled, but heavy with disappointment. He said he had spoken to the nanny. He knew the dates. He knew the surgery was real. He knew the words they had used. He repeated them slowly. Nuisance and burden. The color drained from my parents' faces. My father tried to interrupt, but Grandpa didn't let him. He said he had raised them better than this. That family doesn't abandon family, especially not a daughter lying on an operating table, especially not innocent children. My mother started crying, saying they didn't mean it like that the tickets were expensive. That's when my grandfather shook his head, disappointment etched deep into his face. He told them that character is revealed in moments like these, and they had failed. Then he turned to me and did something I never expected. He apologized, not just for them, but for not seeing sooner how they treated me. He said he was proud of me for protecting my children and for standing up for myself when no one else would. Tears burned my eyes as I listened because for the first time since that night in the hospital, someone from my family truly saw me. My parents stood there in silence, stunned as my grandfather told them there would be consequences. He made it clear he supported my decision to cut ties and cut financial support, and that he would no longer enable their behavior either. My father looked angry. My mother looked terrified. And in that moment, I knew they finally understood. They had crossed a line they couldn't step back over. The room felt heavy, but also strangely peaceful. I wasn't the one being scolded anymore. I wasn't the burden. And as my grandfather finished speaking, I saw something on my parents' faces I had never seen before. Shock mixed with shame. Because they realized this time they couldn't rewrite the story. The silence after my grandfather finished speaking felt heavier than any argument my parents had ever thrown at me. My mother opened her mouth as if to defend herself again, but no words came out. My father looked down at the floor, his jaw tight, his confidence completely gone. For the first time in my life, they weren't in control of the narrative. My grandfather turned to me and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. A simple gesture that somehow gave me more strength than years of trying to earn my parents' approval. He told me I had done the right thing, that protecting my children was not selfish but brave. He reminded my parents that love is proven through action, not excuses. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was small, almost unrecognizable, asking if we could move past this. That was the moment I knew how much I had changed. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I told them calmly that moving past something requires accountability, and they had shown none when it mattered most. I reminded them of that night of me lying in a hospital bed facing emergency surgery. While they chose a concert over my twins, I repeated their words back to them, nuisance and burden, and watched their faces crumble as they heard them out loud. My grandfather nodded, silently backing me, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. My parents tried to bargain then, promising to help more, to be better, but it sounded hollow. Too late. I told them my decision stood. I would keep my distance, not out of revenge, but to protect my peace and my children. When they finally left, the door closing behind them felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. My grandfather stayed a little longer, holding his great-grandchildren, smiling softly and telling me I was stronger than I knew. After he left, I sat on the couch with my twins asleep against me. The house quiet again, but this time it felt safe. I understood something deeply then. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by who shows up when everything is on the line. My parents' faces, when Grandpa spoke, were priceless. Not because they were embarrassed, but because truth finally caught up with them. And as I looked at my children, I knew this cycle ended with me. If this story moved you, if you believe standing up for yourself and your children matters, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful real-life stories like mine. Because sometimes the hardest moments create the strongest.